Got to at us. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, breadwinners, thread spinners, and all those in between. You're now watching the TNF podcast with your favorite bipolar rock and roller, Mr. J. Curtis Strickland. All right. I just want to announce some of the upcoming shows that we have in the pipeline. We started to do a Wednesday show at 8 p.m. So there's going to be twice the TNF throughout the course of the week. The 21st of Wednesday, we have Jeremy Allen Gould of the Rumors Are True podcast, which is a really great show that you should check out. It's all available on all streaming outlets. That's going to be the 21st at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The 25th, Sunday, we've got Joe Mustin and Johnny Smerdell of Advent and Beloved. That's going to be at 5 p.m. EST on Sunday. Damian Moyal as Friends Rust, Morning Again. That's going to be on the 3rd, March 3rd at 5 p.m. EST. Jeff Jenkins from Code 7 is going to be the 10th of March at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. And Brian Harris from Death Before Dishonor is going to be on the 17th of March at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. Everybody, thank you so much for joining the show. One thing I want to do also before we get started is promote the Hell's Heart merch company. You can head on over to hellsheartco.bigcartel.com for some awesome hardcore and movie themed inspired t-shirts. If you use the code 20 at the checkout, you can get 20% off your entire order. And these are the highest quality t-shirts. I print on Bella Canvas, 50% cotton. 50% polyester, 25% cotton, 25% rayon. And they're awesome shirts. I encourage you to buy one or two or three. It'll be great. So I want to introduce my guest in the house today. He is a member of the group, has been a member of the group MUDDFOOT, No Resistance, the PALOOKAS, and a slew of others. He is a really awesome hardcore punk rock dude that has been the bat for me on social media, which is amazing because I don't get that very often. And he is just a really awesome, all around cool dude, Mr. Sundarananda Dāsa. What's going on, man?
You're too kind. I'm psyched to be able to hang out with you, brother.
Yeah, likewise. I'd been communicating with you on Facebook for quite some time.
Yeah.
And, I think you just have a really interesting backstory and trajectory. And so, yeah, it's a real pleasure to be able to have you on. And my first question, since you come from the music scene, and in addition to hardcore punk, you've also played other genres of music.
Sure. Yeah.
What was your first memory of music, and did you grow up in a musical family? Did you have uh family members, friends that played music? Did you play in a high school band? What's your history with that?
Um, I grew up in a music obsessed family. Not many, not many family members who played instruments. My grandmother played piano, so that was the first instrument I started taking lessons in when I was, I think, 4 or 5. Um, but my whole family, from the time I can remember, has always been completely music obsessed. Like, my dad was always a big record collector and like always kind of exposed me to everything. Like, figure I was born in 71. So, and my dad was 21 at the time. So by, 76, 77, his favorite things were all like Blondie and the Ramones and the Clash and all stuff like that. That, you know what I mean? Growing up in New York and being that age, that was the big thing. So
Sure.
I always heard that stuff first. Bowie, and he. It's funny. He wasn't really a big Beatles guy. I wound up being like a big Beatles guy like early on, but he wasn't, because I don't know. He had something about them kind of faking the funk. Like he had this idea in mind that the Rolling Stones were the real guys. You know what I mean? He
Yeah.
wasn't so big into the Beatles for whatever reason. Like, but
A
I
lot of
think maybe
people
that's
argue
why
that
I became a big Beatles
the
fan.
Beatles were kind of like the first like boy band,
Sure, but I mean, when you think about it, I mean, and people say that about like the Sex Pistols say too. Oh, they were a boy band. But I mean, the way music worked and the way the music industry worked, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a band that wasn't, put together, or that whose members weren't, handpicked, or what
Right.
I mean, or like dressed up a certain way to be able to sell records, because back then the music industry was all about selling records. It was selling an
Yeah.
image to sell records. It wasn't about the music at
All
all.
those 50s doo-wop bands, they were all like had to have a real clean cut image, had to have,
Sure.
a certain aesthetic going for them. So, yeah, I don't really subscribe to that notion either. And I think the Beatles were fantastic musicians.
And the funny thing is, what people don't realize, or a lot of people don't think about, especially now, there was no such thing as a teenager as a market until after, like, World War II. Like early 50s. You know what I mean? There was no such thing as a teenager as some separate entity from like child or adult. You know what I mean? So, once you started having those early 50s groups, and they realized, like, hey, wait a minute, there's this whole group that we can market these young bands to that are just like them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, teenager was invented as a kind of a marketing thing,
Marketing thing, right.
you know.
Yeah.
So that's what led to, the music industry and the record companies kind of, putting groups together and giving them a specific image to be able to sell, you know, and, certain things that they couldn't sell, they would replace with, acceptable substitutes. Like, obviously I'm not a big Elvis fan, and people get on me for that, um, but without getting into that, the idea was, this was a guy who was doing music and like selling records, and being played on the radio and being on TV, doing music that black people were not allowed to
Mm.
do. That someone else invented, but wasn't
Right.
going to be allowed to be on TV or in,
No.
so the record company invented this whole persona, and you know
Yeah, absolutely. And
so
so, you had a really good exposure to music. My folks, they were kind of probably a generation before your dad, and grew up on a lot of the classic rock, and like your Stones, your Led Zeppelin and
sure,
things
sure.
like that. And I always assert that, had my dad been born maybe like a decade later, he would have been a full-fledged punk rocker, like just
Yeah,
because that's
yeah.
his whole, like,
Mhm.
his whole approach to life and attitude, and he even
Yeah,
likes some of the stuff now. So,
yeah.
um, but you had a really, really good exposure to some really classic, you know, uh, underground seminal rock acts at the time. And what do you remember as being your first foray into like the world of punk rock and the world of hardcore, and like mod and like the British invasion, and then the British like um revitalization? What do you remember as your first exposure into that?
So, one of the things that I also got from my dad was that, he wasn't stuck on specific genres. He completely understood, like, look, you've got the blues, and from that stemmed all these different things and different people claiming to, you know, have reinvented it, or have their own variation. Where he goes, but when it comes down to it, you know what I mean. What you're looking at is what comes from this specific source. You know what I mean. Um, so that's why it was okay to, he would pull out some record from, God knows where, some left field thing. He pulled like the first Prince records. I remember seeing that when I was a kid, and I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to be looking at this. You know what I mean? Like, but he would break it down for me, like, what this music is. And like I said, he wasn't a musician. He's just a guy with an ear who was music
Yeah.
obsessed. So when I was in, I think it was like second grade, maybe second grade or third grade. Second grade it was. My couple of my friends and I, we decided we were going to have a band, and and we all had, because it was like the mid '70s, and we all had like just like bowl haircuts anyway and stuff, and there was literally four of us just singing yeah 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 over and over again. Like the teacher had us like perform in front of the class and stuff. It was complete garbage, you know what I mean? But
Yeah, yeah, yes.
yeah, but in my mind, it was like, all right, this is what you do. You know what I mean? You get together with a couple of guys, you make sure you look a certain way, you know what I mean? And then,
Right.
you know, um, so the that led to going to see like with one of my friends from that same grade. A couple of years later, sixth grade or so, we would be allowed to go to where these like local bands would play, and it was usually like cover bands and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But because they were young, these guys are like, in high school, what I mean? We're right before high school, and these guys are in high school, and, immediately it clicked. It's like, wait a minute. Anyway, we can do that. We're allowed to do that. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Which of course, is the same realization you have later on when you start going to like hardcore shows and stuff like that. It's, the, you know, at that time, these bands are doing covers of like, I don't know, like, just rock and roll stuff, and you know what I mean, or like early metal stuff, and you know what I mean. But like I said, they were young, so it was like we're allowed to do that. You know what I mean? We're allowed to wear whatever we want. We're allowed to do that. So so that always led to like having like bands in school that we would like get together after school, and we were in Catholic school, so it always looked like we were like suited up like a Beatle band or something. You know what I mean? Because we had like our haircuts and ties on, or and we would just
Sure.
get together and like learn covers and stuff like that. Ride our bikes home from school and like learn covers and stuff. So it didn't really turn into like a real band or anything like that until like high school time.
And
Um,
you grew up in the New York area.
yeah. I grew up in Staten Island. I was born in Manhattan, and then got to Staten Island when I was 2 or so. And I
What
always,
what do you what do you feel like? And I don't know how long it's been since you've been back to New York, but what do you feel like New York present day is lacking as far as because I know there's been a lot of like gentrification and sanitization up there to where a lot of the old New Yorkers, Agnostic Front sings about it. I miss the old New York, like to
sure,
where
yeah.
it was there was like a level of danger almost. What do
Oh
you
yeah,
feel like
yeah.
New York is lacking now that New York of the past didn't have
Um,
did have rather?
I can't necessarily, I've been here in Houston for like 20, 22, 23, almost 23 years now. It was right after September 11th I came here. So I can't necessarily speak to what might be missing from, uh, shows or like the scene in general, but things that I would say are definitely different would apply to anywhere, not just New York. Like for instance, when you're young and you're walking down the street and you see a kid wearing, say, like a Murphy's Law shirt, or anything else, Gorilla Biscuits, anything, you knew there's no way that kid has that shirt unless he went to the show to
Right.
see them. You know what I
Right.
mean? There was no such, there was no internet. There was no, you know what I mean? You
Right.
weren't going to like the mall and buying these shirts. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So there was always like that immediate camaraderie. You're walking down the street, you see, it was always like, the nod, and everybody
Sure.
was cool because it was like, yeah, that kid would not have that shirt on unless he was doing the same thing I was,
Right.
or he was at the same place I was, there's no other way to get it.
Right. Right.
So to a large extent, I think, the internet has kind of ruined that whole part of, making like punk rock and hardcore like personal, like, like
Sure.
now, older, we consider that music ours because it was something we had to really like dig for and like seek out.
Right.
You know what I mean? It wasn't
Yeah,
something
we didn't
collective.
have online streaming or anything like that, and it was like, you had to go to record stores to buy the record, and
Yeah.
I'm a little bit younger than you, so like I started to come up in the generation where music was being digitized, and then Napster and
Oh,
LimeWire
sure,
and all
sure.
these other things, which would honestly great for a lot of underground music because it did bring
Absolutely.
exposure to a lot of those things, but you almost feel like there's this possessiveness of underground music where you're like, no, no, why,
Yeah. Yeah,
why
of
do you have
course.
such easy access to it
Yep.
when I had to
Yep.
like dig through record bins and things like that?
The effect I think that also has is that I don't feel like people kind of stick with anything for very long. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
because we had to seek out these bands and like go see them wherever this obscure place where they were playing and stuff. It became such a personal thing that you know we didn't just look it up, read about it. download a couple songs, and then the next week we go on to something else. There
Rap
was,
music or something. Yeah.
yeah, you didn't just go on to something else. You stuck with that because it's
You
like, what are
invested.
you
Yeah.
going to do next? And the when you talk about like the kind of element of danger, like when the great thing about, like, say, like the Sunday matinees at CB's, right? You go to the worst neighborhood in the city. You know what I mean? Like, and but because it was a Sunday afternoon at like 1 or 2 o'clock, your mom didn't know. You didn't have to tell anybody. It's like it's Sunday afternoon. You're
Right.
going out with your friends. You know what I mean? Then a couple hours later, you come home for dinner. You know what I mean? And you just saw the greatest thing you've ever seen. You know what I mean? And you were just around like some of the most insane criminals on earth. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
but you went out and did that. You know what I mean? And there wasn't anyone to stop you because they didn't know. And
Yeah.
that made it like this magical kind of thing that, again, it was completely personalized. Like, this is my thing. You know.
Sure. Absolutely.
Um, and so I don't know. So that kind of stuff doesn't exist anymore. That opportunity for kids to kind of really like internalize and make all of it like personal, I don't think exists anymore. But that's not just New York. That's everywhere.
No doubt. No
So,
doubt. Yeah. It's almost like the allure of it has kind of been tainted in that it is so accessible. But I think there is also a lot of there's a lot of the old guard there that still tries to kind of keep it on
oh,
the
yeah,
low,
yeah,
so to speak.
yeah. Sure. But with that said, I mean, a lot of people got all up in arms, like, say, like when the Misfits started, playing the big shows again, and say they had that big show in the stadium in New Jersey, and it was going to be the Cro-Mags and Murphy's Law were going to play with them. And and you get people up in arms like, oh, that's not hardcore, that's not punk rock. They're playing this big thing. I'm like,
Oh,
you know what? That's the greatest thing in the world. When we were
yeah,
younger, we were mad that other people didn't accept that these were the greatest bands. This was the greatest music. You know what I
right.
mean? Like,
Yeah,
we were so convinced, like, this is the greatest thing. You've got to hear this. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So I mean, just the fact that those bands got to get to play on such a such a big forum like that, on such a big stage, like, that kind of justifies what we had said about them so many years ago. It's like, man, these bands are
Absolutely.
fantastic. This is huge.
And,
You would
and
love this.
you look at their recordings, the fact that they're so kind of gritty and raw, there is an organicness to it that, like you and I definitely appreciate. But
Oh
those
yeah,
bands always wanted to sound like the contemporary rock acts of the
yeah,
time. The only reason
absolutely.
they didn't was because they didn't have some major studio that was backing
Right,
them, and they didn't
right,
have, the kind of coin that they needed to
sure,
produce like a Van Halen record or something like
right.
that. So it was, there is a really awesome thing about that, but at the same time, you want to see your friends and your friends bands be successful. Like
Sure, of
when I heard
course.
the original Misfits were playing again, I was like, holy shit. I didn't really like the $250 price tag on it,
Yeah,
but
of
I was
course.
like,
Right.
I would have went, and then I just didn't. I had the money, but I was conflicted about it. But yeah, you definitely, when you see your friends, like, I'm of the opinion, like, Morrissey says we hate it when our friends are successful, and it's like, no,
Yeah,
I love it. I love that.
exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
I think it's great because it essentially catapults. You can have a successful friend's band, and then they're like, hey, do you want to come on tour with us? Or
Sure.
hey, we think you're really awesome. You want to play this show over here with these guys? It's like, why wouldn't you want success upon your friends?
And even on like a kind of a selfish level, it's like a pat on the back saying, "See, I was right. I was right about them. I told you that this man was great." And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, it's a little bit of yeah, you definitely feel like a sort of a sense of accomplishment.
sure,
So let's talk about, your earliest hardcore like and punk rock memories.
sure, sure.
What's the first show you ever saw, and what did you take away from it? Was it a matinee at CB's?
No, there were a couple of little, like, smaller kind of local shows, but the first kind of major one I think that stands out was it was Circle Jerks, Gangrene, and TSOL at this place called the Ritz that used to exist in New York. And the Ritz, there was a promoter. I think it was called. I think they called it like Rock Hotel. It was called, and they always had like these gigantic shows that when going to see the Circle Jerks. I was young enough that I had only seen the Circle Jerks on like Decline of Western Civilization. I'm like 14, 15 years old, and I'm watching this, and in your mind when you're watching it, it makes it seem like it was so many years before, but it really wasn't. And so
Yeah.
in the early '80s, all of a sudden I go to see the Circle Jerks, and like my mind was blown. It's like, oh wait, this really exists. This isn't just some like movie thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was also the first time I ever started to get an inkling of the differences between like the different subcultures. You know what I mean? And why I would eventually gravitate towards certain ones and not others. Because and the thing is, you're always led to believe by people that aren't necessarily into punk rock or hardcore or anything that like the quality of the musicianship is crap, and I was so blown away by how great the sound was, how great the guitarist was, how great the drummer was. I mean, you listen to like the drums on the first Circle Jerks album. That's insane. There's like a human being played that. You know what I mean? Like,
And they had to play it for real. There was
yeah,
no going back and Pro Tools
yep,
and digital
yeah.
editing or
That's not
anything. You had
sped
to do
up
that
or
in a
anything.
take,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so seeing that live, it's like, wait a minute. This musicianship is up there with whatever these people think is the greatest thing. It's like you play those drums. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it just may be a little bit aesthetically unappealing to some people, which is interesting because then it actually did become kind of a fad. You look at like a lot of those early '80s movies, and they were emulating everything that was being done. I'm of the firm believer that punk and hardcore has always kind of set the benchmark for a lot of modern culture today, because it's
Yeah,
like
I think so too.
you look at many like stylistic choices, and even like we were talking about, veganism. I mean, that was primarily a thing that you saw in like the hardcore scene, where it
No,
was
yeah,
like,
absolutely, yeah,
like
yeah,
vegan and straight edge bands and things
yeah.
like that. And now it's like you've got athletes and celebrities and entertainers that are, living a vegan lifestyle. And so it's like, I I don't know why hardcore still gets like, like why, like
And even not just like the vegan thing and stuff, but culturally in general, that there's an interview with John Lydon. I think it's in it might be the Filth and the Fury movie, um, where he mentions something about how he considered them to be mods basically, because they were kind of obsessed with creating this kind of not necessarily new but very personalized kind of fashion. You know what I mean?
right.
And a lot of people kind of jumped on because they were following from that angle, not even necessarily the music angle. You know what I mean? So and of course you see that by the time of the early '80s, you see that bleed over into mainstream stores and stuff. You paying
Anna,
$100 for ripped jeans. You know what I
right.
mean? Or
Yep.
it's like, or of course like Doc Martens became huge. It's like, great. Now I got to pay $200 for my stupid vegan docs, just because like we didn't keep it to ourselves and like everybody
Right,
else was
right.
cool.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
absolutely. Yeah. And so you started Mudfoot. Now, talk a little bit about that. Tell us about the origins.
Okay, so before that, in high school, a couple of us had a band called Kulturkampf. Now, of course we thought we were smart because Kulturkampf was the name of a movement started by the Bismarck in Germany, back in the 1800s, which was like against the Catholic Church. Now we were all Catholic school kids, so it was like, oh, that's the name of our band. You know what I mean? Like, so clever,
Mm.
um,
Bet they didn't have good things to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, and it was, the band was crap. You know what I mean? It was crap, but
Yeah.
we tried. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Um, and but that was also with that group. That was the first time I ever had to like Krishna conscious lyrics because and it was just kind of verses lifted from like Bhagavad Gita and stuff that I would sing in some of the songs, But
Sure.
only because it's like, hey, I want to tell people about this, you know what I mean? But just like with the vegan thing, I don't like beating people over the head with something that they didn't ask for. You know what I mean? If you
Right.
want to know, I'll tell you everything. You know what I mean? But my guru had a thing that was very different from what I was taught in the ISKCON days. His thing was like, you don't give this to someone if they don't ask for it. If they don't want it, you don't push it on them. Which of course was the direct opposite of you know
Yeah.
selling books on Broadway. You know what I mean? During the week, you know what I mean?
Well,
Book distribution.
you
So,
shouldn't give it to them if they don't ask for it. I mean, what if you just say, "Hey, I want you to have this book."
oh
Is
yeah,
that acceptable?
that yes, but as far as like kind of like heavy preaching on somebody, it's like yeah, offer them books, offer them anything. Like I mean, when I say Hare Krishna to somebody, I'm not trying to convert them. I'm not, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
it's the same thing as someone saying like, Merry Christmas to me or something like that. You know what I mean? You're just
Sure.
wishing this person well. But
Exactly.
when it comes down to it, I'm offering them something because to me, that's the that's the greatest sound and most effective sound, someone can hear. So by saying that to them, I'm giving them something. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily preaching, but it's kind of giving them the gift that's kind of opening that door to, hey, what does that
Sure.
mean? Why did you say that? You know what I mean?
Well, and you can also view it as a gift in that, at least for myself personally, like Krishna consciousness has changed my life extraordinarily for the better.
No.
And so you want to have that person live out their best experience in this temporary material existence. So it's like, why not give them the gift that has made you into, a better human being?
Well, it's like the idea that the dogs, the trees, they all benefit from hearing you chanting. You know what I mean? So you know,
Absolutely.
giving that benefit to other people too. That's not
Yeah.
wrong. You
So
know?
you were already playing in Mudfoot and then you
No,
received the wisdom of Krishna consciousness?
it was a little before that, because I started, like I said, because I was in Catholic school. Um, you know, Asking questions was frowned upon, you know, and for whatever reason, I was just obsessed with, religious history and comparative religion. I don't know, what it was that sparked that, but I just wanted to know, um, and for example, one time in eighth grade, I uh, I asked a nun, they were reading from the book of Luke, and I said, "Hey, why is Jesus telling all the apostles to buy swords? What's that all about? That's not the Jesus you were telling me about, for the last couple of years." I got in trouble for that, and they, called my parents, and you're not supposed to, you're questioning the Bible. I wasn't questioning the Bible. I would like an explanation. Tell
Clarification.
me more about what this means.
Yeah.
What's going on here. Um, so I started to go to just visiting all different kinds of places. I would go to like a synagogue. I would go to like the Sikh Gurdwara. I would just go to all these places. Just I just wanted to check things out and see like, hey, what are the rest of these people saying?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because I had learned in Catholic school that Jesus had said that he had plenty of things, he had many things to tell them that they weren't ready to hear yet, or you know what I mean. So I was like, all
Right.
right, well, let's go see if there were other people that were ready to hear this, and let's see
Yeah.
what they heard.
Yeah.
So of course, I landed in one day in the. I'll tell you how I landed in the Brooklyn ISKCON temple. I was on the train. I was on the subway going to or from school, and there was a lady who was selling books, and she had this like big kind of board, and it was written on that she was selling these books, but that she was deaf and mute. So she was asking for, donations for selling these books for $1. So I'm just some kid on the train, and I'm looking to see, is one of them was Easy Journey to Other Planets. And I was like, that is spaced out. I'll take one of these. And I gave him money, I brought it home, and I didn't read it. I wound up putting it on the shelf. So a little while later, I was reading a book about the Beatles, and I see a picture of George Harrison, and it's a picture of George Harrison with Prabhupada. And I'm like, why do I recognize this? Who is that? Where do I know this guy from? And I was like, oh. And I went and grabbed the book. So he's the picture on the back of the book. I'm like, this is that guy. So I'm like, so this is how I can find out what on earth George Harrison is talking about in these songs, because I was obsessed with, his like, Indian songs. And
Sure.
of course, like I said, there's no internet. So it's not like I can go look up what he was talking about, so.
Right.
All right. So, back then, they probably still do, but back then they had all the addresses of the temples in the back of the books, So I just went to the Brooklyn Temple one day, and I just walked in there and sitting there in class, and it's a Sunday night, so there's the class before the kirtan and everything, and I had a million questions. I started raising my hand, asking questions, and they answered every question. There was no scolding. No one was calling my mom. You know what I mean? It was
No, 'tis but a mystery, my son.
yeah, you know what I mean? So I'm getting up to leave, and I'm smelling. I'd never had Indian food in my life, and I'm smelling the prasadam coming from downstairs. I'm getting ready to leave, and someone stopped and said, "Oh, aren't you going to take prasadam with us?" And I was like, "What?" They're like, "Yeah, come eat." I was like, "Okay." So I go downstairs and I ate the greatest food I ever ate in my life, and then all of a sudden I was like, "You guys do this every Sunday?" And they're like, "We do this every day. This is just, I was like, I'll see you tomorrow." So that just started me,
Yeah.
So I would go, a couple of times a week. And back then, because I was curious, annoyingly so, I guess, Satyaraj, Stephen Rosen, him at all?
Yeah.
Author. He was there all the time. And so he stopped me one day and he was like, "Listen, if you have all these questions, write them down during the week while you're reading or, doing whatever. And then like meet me here, every, I don't know, Wednesday, meet me here every Wednesday and we can sit down and go through all your questions, And so that was like the greatest thing on earth, because it was the direct opposite to what I'd always, encountered in Catholic school.
Sure.
And a lot of my questions would often have to do with, comparative religion. Like, okay, well, in Catholic school, I learned this, and this. So how does that apply, here, or what is it? And immediately he would show me, and the big thing that I loved was always, don't just take my word for it, like as the authority, like this is where you can go find all this information, this book, and go to this book. So to me, it's like, wow, you know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
they encourage you to actually learn about this and find out what's going on,
Oh yeah. And to the audience members that may not know about Krishna consciousness, would you break it down for us in a very simple and easy to understand method for people who may have not ever heard about it before?
Sure. I mean, it's not different in any way from the basic tenets of any major or ancient religious tradition. Like one is coming to accept and understand that we aren't the physical body. That we are actually something that has existed before the physical body did, and will exist after the physical body doesn't. Understanding that every other living being is the same. We are all, kind of drops in the sea. We're all part and parcel of this larger thing, but we weren't necessarily created. We've always been just, as part of this larger thing, and that once we realize what we actually are and where we came from, the next thing is, wait a minute, I can go back to where I came from. You know what I mean? I can go back to my original state. I don't. We live in a place where we get old, where we get sick, where there's pain and suffering, and people die and stuff. It's not really the best thing. It's not something. If I had a choice, I would eliminate all of that. So it's like, okay, well, what's the cause of death? It's not heart attacks. It's not the cause of death is birth. If I wasn't, if I didn't come into this body, I couldn't die.
Right.
Or I wouldn't. So the whole idea is that, wait a minute, you're telling me that there's a way I can stop this whole process of dying and suffering and watching everyone I love like suffer and die. It's like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I sign on for that? You know what I mean? And the whole thing is based on like devotion and actual love. It's like, yeah, sign me up. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And a lot of people are. A lot of people sometimes will say like, well, no, I'll only follow what's necessarily what's in, say, the Bible. Like and because I was so obsessed with history and I was like, all right, well, let's go backwards here. I want to get I want to find the first method. You know what I
Source.
mean?
Yeah.
Let's find, you know what I mean? It's like, and when I say this, I'm not saying it as a detractor. I don't, and I know it sometimes comes across that way, but the books of the Bible, okay, every place, every person, every animal, everything you read about is all from one specific area.
Right.
There, those who wrote these things down. Now, and I'm not saying who I believe the authors were or not, because that's if that's for other people to obsess over.
Sure.
Um, it's almost as if there was no acceptance. I'll say, I don't want to say knowledge, but acceptance of the outside world. I mean, the outside. But we know that there were people everywhere else, and there were, I do not, but because I believe God is a loving God, I don't believe that everyone else was just ignored. You know what I mean? I don't
Right.
believe, you know what I mean? So, I
That
think,
somebody that a just and loving God would send one of his creations to perish in eternity for not
yeah,
knowing. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So I don't believe that, we like to make, we like to paint an image of God as, petty and avaricious as humans are, you know what I mean? But I just don't believe that to be the case.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I do believe that, God has interacted with those of us in human bodies, long before the descriptions in the Bible and after, and because I do believe, God to be a parent in a certain way, so I don't think that we're just dumped here and just like, well, good luck. You know what I mean? Um, so there's no, so with that said, there's in our particular tradition, for those who don't know, uh, there's no idea that you have to, convert from being a Christian or Jewish or anything else to being, a Vaishnava, or, to engage in this practice. Like, Sanatana Dharma, as you know, is what we call it, or what it's called, is an eternal function. It's a process. It's not a a set of religious rules. It's a literal process that anyone can engage in. So it's like, you don't have to, turn your back on your beliefs or the traditions that your family has held on to, or whatever. Especially if you really believe them. There's no reason why. It's just, you can use this as kind of an enhancement. You can. It's kind of like, I used to say that many religions are like schools. But then you can use you can use Sanatana Dharma or Vaishnavism as kind of like a college course, or you know what I mean. You can get a degree in this. You can further study. It can give you like the
Right.
bigger picture, and it'll actually enhance your previous practice, or the practice that you grew up in. Like this,
Sure. Sure.
you don't need to throw it aside. So yeah. So in the simplest way, I don't think of it as a separate religion, really.
Yeah.
Um, it's just kind of uh, more advanced practices, or like, here's the bonus pack. You know what I mean? Like, so
The thing that you mentioned initially was that, we teach that, we are not this body.
sure.
Uh, do you feel that a lot of modern day Krishna conscious movements or even individuals have kind of missed the mark on that?
I do, and unfortunately, you can see that evidence of that, all over social media. You know what I mean? When people, like certain things that you've even dealt with. You know what I mean? People immediately will identify someone, on the bodily platform. It's like, hey, wait a minute. Didn't you come to this from, already understanding that that wasn't the case? Like, how,
Right.
and it causes people to be, I've found so many devotees to be so just arrogant and like kind of like derogatory, and just like, have this kind of air of superiority because, they've memorized what someone said in a letter, you know what I mean? But, didn't apply it to the very first thing you learned from that person who wrote that letter. You
Sure.
know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
And it's sad, really. I mean, and you know, with my kids, like when my kids were born, like raising my kids, it kind of, it reminded me of so many things. When I was first explaining to them, about the soul and what because they and it was they had questions immediately, um, like about the dog, and about and about and so it's like the very simple things that that you heard people teaching to kids, and like the gurukul back in the day, like, or even just in the temple teaching, like newcomers, like, hey, if both my arms were amputated tomorrow, both my legs were amputated, I wouldn't be 50% Sundarananda. I would still be me. So obviously that wasn't it. That's and the way we even speak, like, oh, this is my hand, this is my finger. Who's saying that? You know what I mean? There's somebody,
Yeah.
they're saying my car, or like, this is my chair. Like, these things are separate from me.
Sure.
So that's the simplest thing to understand, like from early on. So you have so many people these days that I'm just, I don't know if it's because they, seek to be in some kind of position of authority, or what, but or if they just, they need a pat on the back, or someone to call them like Prabhu. I don't know. But
It seems that this day and age that we're so concerned with identity, and that a lot of that has sort of trickled into a lot of Krishna conscious movements,
sure.
in that teaches that you're not the material body that you inhabit, yet they make all these distinctions. And in doing that, do you feel that that kind of detracts from the whole essence of, creating division rather than unification?
Oh, absolutely. Of course it does. It's ridiculous. Um, but unfortunately, that's been there since the beginning. Since the whole thing came to the West. It's like, blame us for that. You know what I mean? It's not just the modern age. I think it was early on. You always had this kind of battle between the brahmacharis and the grihastas, and like which one was better, because well, we're doing, they're doing the real work, and then what I mean. But without grihastas, you wouldn't have
You
you
wouldn't
couldn't
have the
be a
temple,
brahmachari,
you wouldn't have, yeah.
you know. So, you know,
The distinguish between the two, brahmacharis are, the
yeah.
celibate monks that inhabited
Oh,
the
dude.
temple. The grihastas are the householders that, pay for, the temple, give donations. They're married. Yeah.
So, so unfortunately from early on, particularly in the West, I guess, when everything first came to the West, you immediately had those kind of, identity issues, and like, people are creating a hierarchy based on, what they identify someone with or not, and it's just like, that's kind of backwards, and I know Prabhupada wasn't thrilled about that either. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now
But,
you followed, you were initiated by Sri Narayan Maharaj,
yes.
and you had, you know, uh, sort of an indoctrination with, not an indoctrination rather, but an introduction into Gaudiya Vaishnavism within ISKCON.
This is the first, yeah.
So, yeah, what kind of made you choose the different path?
So, oh, and just to kind of circle back and answer your other question, yes, uh, this all started right before Mudfoot. So at the time Mudfoot started, yeah, I already had all this, in the, you know, in the early, like, like mid 90s, things got crazy because, um, that's when my Gurudev started traveling and started leaving India and going around, and early on, the only thing I knew about him was, okay, this was one of Prabhupada's godbrothers who he, was called to his bedside, when he was getting ready to leave his body, and he was the one that Srila Prabhupada asked to do, um, basically his the funeral rites, so to should place him in samadhi, and the whole burial, and um, so that's all I really knew about him, back then, because you know in ISKCON it was kind of frowned upon to read anything or listen to anything from outside, and there are certain reasons for that I understand, similar to when Prabhupada first came here, the things that he would teach those first devotees here in America, he limited to a certain kind of a certain set of texts, a certain, because these are, you gotta remember, these are people who'd never heard any of this ever in their life, anything like it. So he couldn't bombard them with this whole giant thing and expect that any of it was going to
Mm.
stick. You know what I
Different
mean?
sects, and they might have different
Yeah,
practices,
and,
and yeah.
and I mean, and when you go back and you think about like him coming here, it's like, okay, yeah, it's amazing. He was this old man who came here and like taught these people and stuff. But when you really like think about the details, this was a genius. It's insane that like this
Mm.
he came here to some place that had never heard of any of this. You know what I mean? He manages to teach these people and train them up in temple after temple, to the point where like they can actually like engage in the process and teach other people, and it's incredible that he
Yeah.
spread this around, and the details of it, spread around the details of it in such a short period of time to so many people. It's
Mm.
insane,
Yeah. Absolutely.
you know, the- um, so when back then, uh, one of my buddies in the Brahmachari ashram, who also later became got initiated by Narayan Maharaj. He said, "Hey, have you ever read any of Narayan Maharaj's books?" And it was all kind of like hush hush, you know what I mean? It's like, what? I'm not supposed to talk about that in here, you know what I mean? And he gave me one, so I'm like, oh man, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I read it, and it was like it's like something like something that Alex says in A Clockwork Orange, as clear as an unmuddied lake. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, it was like, wait a minute, I've never heard. Wait a minute, that's what that means. It's like
Yeah.
he put it in the simplest way. It was like ding, I mean, like the light came on. So
Yeah.
of course I wanted to start reading more books. Now, at that same time, there was a devotee named Puru Das. Okay, and Puru, he was a Prabhupada disciple, and then he spent a lot of time after Prabhupada left, a lot of time in New Vrindavan, and he was so he got a lot of the heavy stuff too, aside from like that post Prabhupada kind of scramble for power and stuff. He was witness to in one of the places where it was kind of exaggerated. So anyway, after that, he and his family moved back to New York, and he ran the Prabhupada Museum, which was I think it was the third floor. It was the third floor of the Brooklyn Temple. Was the Prabhupada Museum. There was, the basement was where the kitchen was and the prasadam hall, and then the next floor was the temple, the gift shop. And the next floor was like offices. The next floor was the Prabhupada Museum. Then above that was the Brahmachari ashram, and then the women's ashram above that. But he started having a problem because he had been visiting with Narayan Maharaj, and at the time it was like you don't do that, and some others had gotten in trouble. I guess like Tamal Krishna Goswami and some others who had also visited with Narayan Maharaj, and the reason they did so was because when Prabhupada was leaving, he had said like, hey, if you have any questions, ask him. Well, so they kind of went along and did that. They weren't trying to like hand over the reins of the organization, or they weren't trying, but they were reprimanded pretty heavily for it, So at one time, Puru was a New York City cab driver also, and he was all about the revolution. You know what I mean?
Sure.
What he started doing was the Sunday matinees, the Sunday feasts. He would set up tables across the street from the Brooklyn Temple, because they decided they wanted him to get out of the Brooklyn Temple. He and his family couldn't live there anymore if he was going to continue his association with Narayan Maharaj. So he set up these tables across the street selling books. It was insane, because every Sunday the temple president would come out there screaming and yelling and freaking out, and like, can't do this. And somebody's like, what do you mean? He's like, I'm not on the temple property. I'm over here on the street in New York, selling books just like anybody else.
Right.
My God, the war that caused. So it got really ugly, and it just left a really bad taste. I was like, this really isn't. I can't imagine that, like, Prabhupada would be okay with any of this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Especially after, they had gotten past the whole, zonal acharya thing, and that had calmed down and everything. Everybody was starting to get back to normal. So now this, and
Sure.
and the way they would talk about Puru and Narayan Maharaj inside the temple, like during the Sunday feast, it was I couldn't believe it. I mean, a lot of people that come on Sundays, are there for the first time. They're not, regulars, or they're not, members, and so, I couldn't believe, like, just like the hate and all the craziness that they were spewing forth to, all these people. I'm like, you expect these people to come back here? Like, they're coming in here and they're hearing all this madness they know nothing about and have no connection to, So that inspired me, of course, to, read more books and start hanging out with Puru. You know what I mean? I was like, what's so crazy about these books?
You're like, maybe he's got the right idea.
Yeah, it's like, what are they so up in arms about? Like, what are they worried about with these books? So I started reading them all, and it's like I fell in love with the voice, like the way these, the way these explanations were written. I couldn't believe it. It's like, these are things that I've read before, but now it's being explained from like a slightly, more like, not a different angle, but like just a bigger picture, and it's
Way articulated. Sure.
and of course, when you're going to look for, or when you seek a guru, of course, that's that's what you're looking for. The one who kind of opens your ears and makes you understand things and speaks in a way that, appeals to you specifically. It's like, I've been in a million classes and heard so many people speak, and the information was great, but this was just, it just seems so personal, and it just seemed so like, I really want you to understand this. So, here I'm explaining it to you in a way that, that I've understood it, so that, you can, more easily understand it. And I couldn't take it. So I started writing letters to Narayana Maharaj, and the letters I would get back, I was like, this is like like my grandmother or something, or like my grandfather. It was like just so personal, and you know what I mean. So of course immediately I sought initiation. Uh, the the guru I had previously been kind of studying over and then was kind of aspiring towards. Um, he was kind of falling out of favor, I guess I should say. In ISKCON, there were some issues, which turned out to be, a lot of the things that he was accused of were completely unfounded, and he turned out being okay. But at the time, I was like, oh, I can't, take initiation from this person when, and then in my mind, it was like, why wouldn't I want to just go to the source? And I started reading all these letters between like Prabhupada and Narayana Maharaj, from when Srila Prabhupada first came to America. They would write letters back and forth. I'm like, these guys are brothers. You know what I mean? It was amazing, and like my guru would send Prabhupada like, mandungas and things like that. And you know what I mean? It was just like, wow, and it's like, this is why he asked him, to conduct his burial and all this, you know what I mean? Because they were that close, So reading those letters, like, I want to go to the source. I want to, this is the person who is so close to Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada is the first person I got any of this information from, when it comes down to it. So it's like, yeah, I want to, go to the source. And so Puru actually advocated for me and put in the good word. And then Narayana Maharaj was going to be coming to America for the first time. So it's like, let's go. And so he's like, all right, meet me in Virginia, or, it was in Virginia. And that's
history. That's awesome. Now, how does Krishna consciousness, as far as your projects post Mudfoot, and even your current projects, how does that kind of help you to write music? How does it help you to kind of stay situated? How big of an influence is it on you at present?
Well, again, because Krishna consciousness isn't necessarily, like a religion,
Yeah.
it's kind of like it informs your worldview. You know what I mean? So a lot of things I write, whether intentional or not, are coming from that point of view. You know what I mean? So it's not like, and there's not, you don't really have to give people information, or to express certain things in song. I'm doing it from my point of view, which is informed, of course, by Krishna consciousness. Like, so it's going to be in there either way. You know what I mean? Whether I name a song with a Sanskrit title or not, like, it's going to be there. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So
What was your foray into the whole, like, kind of the British invasion type music? Was that something that had already been influential in your life? I mean, clearly from your
well,
your upbringing, it sounds like it
yeah.
was.
Well, when I first got into like punk rock, say, it was bands like the Clash and stuff like that. Like my dad had, that just kind of fell in line with me. Those are bands from England that are, coming over and, like, wearing some kind of clothes that I need to check out, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm playing like specific. But I was always obsessed with the mod thing early on, because again, I'll go back to like I said, I'm not really a big Elvis fan. You know what I mean? So, and in general, I'm kind of not really a fan of that sort of thing. So, realizing that like say like the Who was like one of my first favorite bands, And so, of course, you see Quadrophenia, because in America we didn't have like the big mod thing or anything, you know what I mean? But I mean, we did, but that's not what we called it. Like like when I look at pictures of my parents when they were younger, and they're going to like Motown shows and things like that. You know what I mean? Seeing the suits they're wearing, and and looking at their hair and stuff. I'm like, oh, that's what they were doing over there, but they called it a specific thing because the mods. It's very similar to what happened in Jamaica. All right, you had Jamaican musicians in the late 50s and early 60s, or even mid 50s to the early 60s, who were they were getting in radio stations from from the South of the United States, and they're hearing all this, they're hearing all the Motown stuff, and they so that's how ska happened. Because you had these mentor musicians who were like, wait a minute, they're also hearing all this all this R&B and all this stuff, and they're incorporating that into the mentor music, and turned it into this whole thing. And when you see all the early ska bands and what they're wearing, the suits, the ties and stuff, they were trying to dress like the American like Motown bands and Stax bands, like the R&B groups, because to them that's what proper groups dressed like,
Sure.
So and of course that's what happened with the mods over in England. People always talk about mod being a British thing, but it's like, okay, so you have kids that are obsessed with Italian scooters, American music, and French haircuts, and it's like, okay, it's a British thing. You know what I mean? So early on there was kind of like a fine line between that and punk rock for me. You know what I mean? And especially like when you start getting into like all like the early skinhead stuff. You know what I mean? That it's like, wait a minute, these guys are just mods who are jerks. You know what I mean? These are like the younger brothers of like the mods, and they're still listening to like great music. You know what I mean? But they just it was just kind of harder edged. It was just slightly harder, but there was definitely the fashion sense was a huge part of it. And so seeing that on records and things like that, or seeing that in books and stuff, to me it was kind of all just kind of different parts of the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So so when you start having like you're hearing like the Foreskins doing like Slade covers, you know what I mean, or you're hearing like what I mean, stuff like that, or as you go on, and then you hear like years later you hear like Oasis doing Slade covers, you know what I mean, and it's like, okay, they understand that it's all kind of part of the same thing, and then you have in the like straight edge, it was the phenomenon, like at least well, I guess it wasn't just in New York. It was pretty much everywhere. But like early on, when you had straight edge bands, to me those were skinhead bands. You know what I mean? Like when you look at like bands like Side by Side and stuff like that, these were all guys with like Fred Perry's and like Doc Martens with like shaved heads. There was nothing different.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden it was like you started having like, I don't know, like sportswear and like what I mean, like sneakers and like those like the puka beads and like but that parallels the transition with that's a complete parallel to the transition from like mods and skinheads in kind of football in soccer culture in England.
Culture, yeah.
You had the casuals who were basically just mods and stuff like that, but they had to start abandoning what they were wearing to games because it's like you can't come in here with like boots and a shaved head anymore. You know what I mean? No. So they started getting into different sportswear and stuff like that. Which was still like high fashion stuff. You know what I mean? And it was still completely connected to the music that they loved. You know what I mean? So so again, to me, that was just another part of the same thing, not a separate thing. Which is the same thing with like straight edge and like that kind of late 80s or mid 80s to late 80s, like New York hardcore, and you started seeing that transition into like sports gear and stuff like that. I don't no problem with that. It was all part of the same thing.
100%, 100%. Now, you're currently doing a project, the Palookas. Talk a
Yeah,
little bit about that. You guys played a
Palooka.
show last night.
Yeah, we did actually. It was
How did that go?
it was awesome. It was a benefit for Food Not Bombs.
Oh, okay.
The Food Not Bombs, they provide vegan and vegetarian meals for the homeless, um, and they've been kind of relentlessly harassed and ticketed and stopped by the Houston police. Um, so
Why
the
is that?
benefit there were a bunch of reasons. At first it was thought to be a permitting problem, but what it really came down to was, um, the idea of like food handling by the public and stuff like that,
Oh, I
and
see.
you know what I mean, and the idea of which was the same thing as what happened with like the Hare Krishnas back in Tompkins Square Park back in the day, also.
Like a health issue or something.
Yeah, and the idea of too many people congregating in one area, and the idea of I mean, we all know what that really means, like what they're really against. You know what I mean?
They don't, yeah, there's
You know what I mean?
somebody at a higher level doesn't approve of that, and they're
Yeah,
gonna take
and
whatever
so
sort of, yeah.
and the idea of like they was accused of like leaving trash everywhere and stuff like that. But they've always like they've always filmed themselves. They've always been very diligent about. So there was actually a hearing in court on Friday, the day before the show, and it was ruled that they can absolutely continue to go out there and serve the public and provide food, and that they can't be stopped right now. So, it's a small victory, but it is a victory. So they can do that. So our benefit was to kind of help pay for this, kind of throw some money towards the tickets that they all got. Um, so it was good that we went in there playing the show with this kind of with the victory the day before in court. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
and people came out to support. And it was great. It was a good time. It was
Talk
very
about, like, your influences. What have you guys been listening to as far as,
well. You see,
what really kinda drives you guys?
one of the things about Palookas is it's the guys in the band are the guys I've known the longest and played with for the longest. Um, like my bass player is one of my oldest friends from when I was a young teenager, from back in New York, and he moved here. Um, so there's that instant familiarity, of course, and then our two guitar players. I was in a band with for many years here when I first moved to Houston. We all lived together, and so and my drummer was this guy is like he's like our drummer's like one of these kind of wizards who there's nothing you can name or hey I'm kind of thinking of this kind of sound or this band or something. He's like an
Nice.
encyclopedia. He immediately has it. He's one of those guys. And I've played with him going back a decade. So when we started the band, the whole idea was, one, we don't really have to put any kind of there's no limit on what we're allowed to play or what we're allowed to write. You know what I mean? It's like,
Sure.
because however it comes out and we get together and write stuff, it's going to come out sounding like us, and it's going to come out sounding like our influences, which are all shared influences. All the the old '70s punk rock and some of the older like mod stuff and like freak beat stuff and but also you'll hear like hardcore and stuff like that in there, like like certain like breakdowns and things like that, because like I
Sure.
said, it was all like, let's just write whatever it is we have in mind to write, and it's going to sound like us because we're the ones doing it. You know what I mean? And we all kind of know
Right.
each other well enough to know, like, if I come up with some part, my bass playing guitarist know right away like where to take it, or what. Oh yeah, well, we need to do it like this because this is what you have in mind, or this is where you. So it makes it so easy to write songs and do things like so I don't so we don't necessarily sound like an oi band in the stereotypical sense. But with that said, I've always had a problem with, again, and this also speaks to that same thing about people needing to like identify and put a tag on themselves and like, people have this idea of like, oi bands and what oi bands sound like and what what an oi band is. When I first, I remember when I first got the first oi album I ever got was Strength Through Oi, all right, in the '80s and something, and I kind of bought it as a joke actually. It was in like it was in the punk rock section, and I bought it from the record store just because no one else was buying it. You know what I mean? And so like I brought it home. I had never heard of any of these bands, but every single one of those bands was different. There was not one of those bands that sounded the same musically. You know,
Right.
they and it was amazing because of that. You know what I mean? It's the only band I was even like familiar with was, and this was on when after that I went and bought like Oi the album and like the Exploited are on there. That was the only band that I knew of before.
Sure.
But none of these bands sounded alike, like not one to the next at all. And then you even looked at bands like, say, like you look at the Foreskins. It's like, well, only one of these guys even has like a shaved head. They got a rockabilly guitarist. Their bass player is like a northern soul obsessed kind of guy. You know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah.
it's like these guys are musicians. They were playing music. Like they weren't, that whole label.
Funny that you keep bringing up the foreskins too, because I had a company commander in the military that was a skinhead. He was like a captain, but like shaved head and like he like when he was off of duty, he was all into the whole skin aesthetic and stuff, and loved the foreskins. That was like one of his favorite bands. It
That's
was so
hilarious.
cool too because like when we were in uniform, he was he was in charge of
Sure.
all of us. But like when we were off work and everything, he was, old, punk oi skinhead type guy. It was crazy.
And so what it came down to when I would argue with people about this, I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I'm like, you listen to the Business, they've got a bunch of piano in their songs, or like, the Foreskins will have a bunch of songs with a bunch of piano. I'm like, so what is it that you're calling oi, or you're saying is not oi? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you know what it came down to is lyrical content.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
people like it's like, well, if you're a straight edge band, we know what you're singing about. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You know what I mean? If if you're so it just wound up evolving into this idea that if you are an oi band now, um, you're singing about your footwear. You're singing about the kind of shirts you wear. You know what I mean? You're singing
Yeah.
about beer and the fact that you have a job. It's like
Yeah.
and the thing is, like, we got that part already.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, so come on, man. Give me some more of what you're thinking about. Sing, some songs about
Yeah.
something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I love so many bands like, like The Business or, or like I said, like the Foreskins or like, the Blitz or, Cockspar or any of these bands. And like, they're singing about all kinds of topics. They're singing about all kinds of things that
Sure.
have to do with your life. You know what I mean? Like, they don't just limit it to like one thing, so that's why I say that we're not, an oi band, but that classification of, you know what I mean? It can't
I get
just be
what you're
like,
saying. Yeah.
oh, it's an oi band because there's a bunch of skinheads in it. I'm like, really? Do you ever look at Cockspar? Like, they were like, there were no skinheads in that band. You know what I
Like that
mean?
line in Airheads. We don't really apply to any labels.
Yeah, I mean,
Crazy.
really. But so yeah, so I mean, Palookas, I mean, I think if you hear the recordings or if you see us, if you're someone who likes music and is appreciative of like a kind of wide range of genres, you're definitely going to hear the punk rock in there. You're definitely going to hear like the oi. You're definitely going to hear like some hardcore, but you're definitely going to also hear some Brit pop and some new wave, and I mean, and we
No,
became.
you're a big Blur fan.
I am. I definitely am.
Oh, they're so good, man. I still don't think that they really get the recognition that they deserve, even though they
No,
had, you
they
know,
don't. They
song
don't.
2 back in the day or,
Yeah, I
whatever.
mean, and
That
they
was on every movie trailer ever.
yeah, I mean, every sporting event, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
too. But even them when they first started coming to America, we'd see them or Oasis or Pulp or any of those bands, but it was always in small places because in America there was no one cared really at the time until stuff like Song Two or going to see Oasis the first time. The place wasn't packed, and you're like kind of like standing there in front of the stage, and then all of a sudden Live Forever came out, and it was like Madison Square Garden. You know what I mean? But
and I remember whenever Wonderwall came out, and like every douchebag at our high school played
oh,
that song, and it
oh,
honestly kind of turned me off from Oasis for a while because that
sure,
was my
sure.
real first exposure to them. And then it's like
Okay,
when you can't necessarily identify with the people that are listening to the music,
yeah,
sometimes you're like, I don't know if this is really my thing. But then you go back and listen to Oasis, and they're fucking amazing. Like they're so
yeah.
fucking good, you know.
And my thing with the Oasis and Blur when they
Yeah, there's the huge rivalry between Oasis and Blur.
yeah when those bands first came out, like you look at the first Oasis record, and I was like, wait a minute, of course, yes, I'm listening to it, and the first song on their very first record is Rock and Roll Star. I'm like, the balls on these guys, it's amazing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then you look at what they're wearing, you look at their hair, you know what I mean? You look at all the little things, you know what I mean? Like the scooters and the
Timothy
pictures.
Green.
It's like these guys are part of, they're part of our thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And the same thing with like Blur. You're looking at like, you open up Modern Life is Rubbish, and you're seeing like a bunch of like, Ben Shermans and Fred Perrys and Doc Martens. It's like they're all part of our thing. You know what I mean? When
right.
you're hearing where what their influences are, like people used to accuse, Oasis of being like a big Beatles ripoff. It's like I hear more like Slade and Bowie and like Rolling Stones
Oh
getting
yeah.
ripped by them in there. I'm like,
Sure, sure,
good
sure.
work, nice work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Than anything else. Yeah, that band Blur, I'm like stupid about that band. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
you
So
know,
good.
they've
Used to
never.
listen to him a bunch a lot back in the day. I haven't really listened to a lot of the Britpop here lately, but I Cool the Shaker's got a new album, don't they?
They do. They're of
Oh
course
wow.
they're another huge favorite, of course.
Yeah.
Um, and two of them in that band are my godbrothers also.
Oh no way.
Yeah, yeah. So and it's funny, you can see exactly when it happened. The first album, they're singing about like Prabhupada and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and there's different stories actually in there about certain things that happened in England in ISKCON before, right after Prabhupada left. But then the second album, all of a sudden, there's 3 strands of beads on everybody, and there's a picture of Narayan Maharaj on the back actually, and so it was. It was that same time when Gurudev started going, traveling to the West. They also took initiation. Um, but yeah, they're another one of my. I'm stupid about that band too.
Yeah. And their exposure to it was through Crispy and Mills' mother, Haley Mills, the actress, right?
Yeah, it's crazy when you watch. Did you ever watch any of like in your old ISKCON days? Did you ever watch? I don't know if they still use these, but there was all these great videotapes of different little documentaries, like one about like Lord Chaitanya. There's one about this one that, and the Lord Chaitanya one was actually narrated by Haley Mills.
I think I
You
knew
know,
that, and I feel like I've seen that, but I'm not
you
100%
might you
sure.
might have. It's one of the big ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So early on, he and the bass player, they used to own this kind of. My dog is coming to say hello. Um,
Hey, bud.
they own this. They owned kind of like a head shop kind of
Okay,
head shop slash music store,
sure.
um, and someone who used to come in there all the time was a Prabhupada disciple who was part of what was his name? One of the 12 gurus who took over after Srila Prabhupada left. The one in England, he was his right hand man basically, and he just became friends with the Kula Shaker guys, and he's the one who kind of exposed them to the name, to King Kula Shaker and the name and where all that came
Wow,
from. And
did not
so
know that.
yeah, and there's a couple of songs actually on the first album where they mention him too, and they mentioned some of the things that happened in the England temple back then. But they so they so they've always been a favorite. Just because obvious reasons, I guess. You know what I mean?
Sure, sure.
It blew me away. The first time I heard them, we were actually going to Mudfoot practice, and we were in my guitar player's car, and like Govinda came on the radio. And at this point, I'm at like the height of like my Britpop kind of obsession. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, I hear that, like,
Yeah,
and like I started like I was shaking. I was like, what's even happening right now? I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah,
there's this Britpop song, and they're singing about they're singing Govinda, and then all of a
yeah,
sudden they're dropping Prabhupada and the Shringadev in there. I'm like,
yeah.
stop the car! What is happening? Like, and I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, they were huge back in the day, man. Like,
Oh
Hey
yeah,
Dude and like yeah, Govinda were like they were huge radio hits, you know?
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Their new album is actually at the top of the indie charts in England.
No
So it's
way.
kind of big,
It's
yeah.
good to see that they're making a resurgence. So
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
a day in the life of Sundarananda Das like? What do you do to kind of like, unwind? What do you
uh, well, I mean, I go to work just like everyone else. I
what
mean,
do you
hey,
do
you can't be in an oi band if you're not talking about your
if you're
job.
not working class? What do you do?
I'm a paralegal, actually.
A paralegal. Okay, cool. So you do
So
that and then you come back
then I
and play a
run.
bunch of Britpop music and
Yeah, basically. Yeah, no, I hang out with my boys, my kids, because it's crazy. I mean, I hate to sound like an old man, but like it's so weird. Like when you have kids, like all of a sudden you've just like created your best friends. It's like, wait a minute, this is the greatest person I ever met. Like I'm looking to hang out with them all the time. You know what I mean?
wow, I've never heard it like put like that before.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like, and my older son, we always joke about it. The second he was born, the first thing I said to him, I picked him up. I said, "Hare Krishna." I was like, "Where'd you come from?" You know what I mean? I was like, who your name? What's your name? You know what I mean? Of course,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just born, so he doesn't have an answer for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's like it's like wow, this is amazing. I have like my the greatest friends I ever met in my life, like in my house now. You know what I mean?
That's awesome.
So yeah, I just we just spend a lot of time with them, and of course I'm a bibliophile, so like I obsess over reading as much as possible.
Do
I'm
you
gonna,
do you read anything as far as like non-Christian conscious literature?
oh sure, yeah, yeah.
What have you been reading as of late?
One of the things I'm obsessed with, which goes back to my original obsession with like religious history and things like that too, is like the history of cults in America,
Okay.
because America, this is the kingdom of the cults. You know what I mean? I mean, so from
Yeah,
the very
100%.
beginning.
Quakers, Shakers,
Oh yeah, from the very beginning. I mean, you got to remember,
Yep.
people came here so that they could, practice whatever wacky version of a religion they came up with without,
Sure.
without the
Obstruction
eyes
from
of,
England. Yeah.
yeah, So it's like, hey, I can go and so. But when you realize how many, especially of course, because that was the first place, but especially on like the East Coast, the amount of cults that like popped up and like actually thrived, and a lot of them, the initial ideas that they started with are great. It's like, oh, that's a fantastic idea, or that's a fantastic take on the Bible, or this, that, and the other. But then, of course, you always have these maniacs who started these things, who eventually it becomes that their whole purpose is to kind of prop
Worship them.
themselves up, and like
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Um,
Like your Jim Joneses and yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, but even before that, it's like there's so many fascinating ones. There's a book called Rogue Messiahs. That's one of my
Okay.
favorite. By this guy, Colin. Have you ever heard of Colin Wilson? Colin Wilson writes
Maybe.
a lot of kind of occult stuff. Which
Sure.
that
Have you
word.
ever seen Holy Hell?
Holy hell!
Yeah.
I don't.
It was a
I don't.
documentary that CNN put out a few years ago, and it's about this guy who was like a cult leader in Southern California, and was he was like a background extra in Polanski's oh god, what was it? Rosemary's Baby, but then just became this like totally just bizarre like cult leader and roped all these people into Los Angeles into it. And I don't want
Well,
to give too much away,
I'm
but
gonna have to get into that tonight now.
yeah, I think you can watch it on YouTube for free. I highly recommend it. I think it'd be right up your alley. But it's whew, that I was just like I felt so bad for those people. You know,
So,
I was just like,
another recent one that I love is a book called Mystics and Messiahs. The
okay,
author is Dr. Philip Jenkins. Philip
okay,
Jenkins, and it's the same thing. Mystics and Messiahs. It's the history of all these various you know messianic types that have propped up and started these religious traditions. Um, there's another one. Uh, oh, Another one I read, Occult America, it's called, is another one. And that's not just about various cults and messiahs. It's about how American culture and American pop culture has always, been derived from, various occult groups or various, occult ideas. And it's amazing. All like this mainstream stuff that like people you would never think about. That's going back to, of course, like Ouija boards and stuff like that.
oh yeah,
But and just the idea of like how these things started and why it's just fascinating. Like Americans are crazy as hell. You
yeah,
know, It's-
Kingdom of Cults,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah. And
What do you
there is
watch?
actually a book called Kingdom of the Cults. But that one's written by a Christian author who his kind of angle is to try to show how like everyone else's ideas are just terrible, and
Wrong. Yeah, of
you
course.
got so it's interesting. Interestingly enough, though, what all of these books have in common is all of them paint the picture of ISKCON as being like, no, this is a genuine tradition that was brought over here by a genuine practitioner. I'm like, it's really nice to see that. You know what I mean?
Did you watch the Peacock documentary?
Yeah. Well, which one? There's
God, I can't even think of the name of it right now. The one that just came out, The Krishnas.
yeah, yep.
Yeah. The cop that was investigating all the stuff that was happening in New Vrindavan, he said, even despite all of this, I think that what the devotees were preaching was actually a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the first books, I ever read about Krishna consciousness, which is not really about Krishna consciousness. When I first started visiting the temple when I was a kid, I read Monkey on a Stick,
Oh yeah. Good
and
luck finding it now.
oh yeah, no, I have a couple of hardcover copies upstairs. Like like I said, I'm a bibliophile, so I kind of pride myself on like I still have every book I've ever read. You know what I mean?
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and that's my big obsession. But Monkey on a Stick, that cop, he's one of the main kind of people interviewed in that, for that book,
I
and
think he's the one in the documentary too, no?
it's the same. Yeah, he's the
Yeah.
same cop from the documentary. They used to call him the Krishna cop back then because that. But you would think that would put me off and make me not want to, but it had the opposite effect because they really went, some way towards explaining that, like, look, this tradition and Prabhupada who brought it here said they're the real deal. That's not, you know what I mean? That's not, so it's, they make sure that you understand that what these other people did with it,
Is
you know
wrong.
what I mean? It's not, it doesn't have any, bearing on whether or not the religion is legitimate, or the tradition is legitimate, or the person who taught them is legitimate. It's just
Right.
showing you that Americans wild as hell. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
yeah, so that cop, yeah, he's one of the ones in the book also, just like in the documentary. Um, and there's another documentary. Um, what is it called? I'm not remembering what it's called. Um, but it's focused, again on New Vrindavan and Kirtananda and all that, and stuff, and
Yeah.
it's just, I'm just so fascinated by that stuff, just because of like
Yeah. That
America.
I got real big into the rabbit hole with the, the whole Jim Jones and Jonestown thing. That
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
fascinating to me because,
yeah, that too.
originally, like, he started it off to be because he was kind of progressive, like he would have
Absolutely.
people of all different races in his
Yep,
church, and
yep,
that was unheard of at the
yeah,
time.
yep,
And
yep.
then, they go to what it was, a Guyana, and then it
Rihanna,
was,
yeah.
just completely it transformed into this whole different animal.
Yeah, but yeah, like you said early on, it was just like it was kind of amazing actually. It was great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh,
It's
no."
crazy how so many things can start with good intentions, and then, the old aphorism is the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah, of
And
course.
and you could go completely off into this whole other direction to where, what you had originally been teaching and preaching is completely perverted and is not even of the same,
Yeah. Yep,
foundation anymore.
yep. And it's and that's kind of like what happened with with Kids in Ananda too. I mean, I remember I would get mail sometimes from the Interfaith League of Devotees,
Mm.
which was coming from New Vrindavan when it was separated from ISKCON, and like you know a lot of what he was trying to point out, like he had a book early on called like Christ and Krishna or
I
something.
have that book
Yeah,
actually.
and
It's I
he
hate
was
to
no
say this,
dummy.
it's a fantastic read.
It really is. Yeah, like I say,
Yeah,
he was no dummy. You know what I mean? It's
right.
um, it was just when he started to kind of transform things into you know, how do we like to say? It was like, oh, well, that's not authorized. When he started to,
Right.
transform, the different ways of dressing and like, oh, you know what? We're going to start chanting in English now. And we're going to say,
Yeah.
one of his former disciples has a book out. Um, and he used to do a lot of writing, like a lot of blog writing early on and a lot of YouTube videos. Um, his book is called Killing for Krishna.
I have
Um,
that book, Doctors
yeah,
Henry Doctorsky.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And that's like, that's like the doctorate course, I think, of like Monkey on a Stick. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
like, you know what I mean?
definitely.
You want to earn your degree in Monkey on a Stick, you read that, you know?
Yep.
He's got another one, um, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, I think it's called.
Yeah, 11 Naked Emperors.
11, that's what it's called. Yes.
Yeah,
And, again, it's like, because he had, a front row seat, so it's just amazing, and it's sad because, like I said, all these things they just emphasize that the problem was not the tradition or the teachings, that none of that was
right.
the problem, you know.
Yeah. It was a lot of the individuals that
It's what
were
people took
corrupted by
and
power, I
did with
think.
it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And,
And
to speak of Oh, go ahead.
yeah, and because like I was saying to you earlier, I think like before we came on, to me there are so many parallels between all of that whole world and the whole like punk rock thing and the whole like skinhead
Yeah,
thing. It's like, again, if you go to the source, there's no problem. You know what I mean? There's no problem with this, with the source material. You know what I mean? It's just
yeah.
what wackos went and did with it. You know?
Right. And to speak on, people that maintain the tradition but, didn't try to rewrite in any sort of way. I think the Krishna core community kind of got that right,
Yeah,
in
I do
that
too.
they're
I
just
do.
we're, normal dudes, kind of look, wear weird clothes or whatever, but,
Yeah,
at the core of, you know the individuals and, their hearts and whatnot, they were devotees, and they
yeah,
didn't try to pervert anything or
yeah,
blaspheme or do anything like that. They were just normal guys. And, I get, we touched on this a little bit here in the interview, but, someone like me gets looked at as like, y- uh, you know oh, you listen to this angry music, you must be an angry person, you're anger, and it's like, I'm a very happy person, and I'm happy with who I am, and I'm happy with how I dress. I have a certain set of standards for myself, and things that I try to uphold, albeit sometimes unsuccessfully. But,
sure.
I'm not like this. I we kind of reconnected again on the whole, trying to find devotional marriage, and like, you were going to bat for me, when
Yeah.
all these other people were like, look at this, like, Sahaja and this terrible person, and I was like, I got to earn money. And like,
Yeah.
sorry if you don't feel like it's the most sanctified and pure method of doing it. And, I don't look like your conventional lay devotee. Like I've I was a brahmachari for 2 years. I wore, orange robes, and I did everything to the T.
Yeah.
But that's not me now. And I think that Krishna consciousness, I think that it also helps you, if you do approach it from a perspective of love and devotion, it helps you to kind of be a real person,
Yeah.
and like
Absolutely.
not
Absolutely.
um corrupted by like dogma or anything like that. I mean, obviously there's a reason for like rules and regulations and things
Sure.
like that, but an individual shouldn't let that um prevent them from loving Krishna or doing service unto Krishna, or even associating with the devotees. I'm kind of persona non grata in a lot of circles, but it is what it is, and I continue to go along the path. So I do appreciate you going to bat for me on that.
Oh, well, it was just it's ridiculous. It was like, come on, really? Like these people are going to use social media, you know what I mean? to
Yeah,
kind of like, it's like, wait a minute, like, you know what I mean? Like
it's
this
so
guy,
toxic, dude.
it's
It's
like,
so especially for devotional creepa. Like it's just like,
like
why?
the idea of going down that road, trying to go down that road, and like, exceeding, I'm like, that's like one of the purest things, man. To me, that was like the coolest thing. You know what I mean? It's like, man, no one does that anymore. You know what I mean? I'm like, that's awesome. And then all of a sudden,
I had to get her to like restrict the comments though, because I was just getting them all back, and I was like, just stop, just stop, just turn it off. I
you
don't
start
want
getting
it.
these detractors, and I'm like, what's wrong with you people? Like, really? I
It's
mean,
like,
come
you
on.
don't know me, man.
Like
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
so, but I mean, this is someone who's going down this road that if this was the 60s or 70s, we'd be like, oh, good, Prabhu, that's the way you're supposed to go about this. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So the person does
yeah.
it now, all of a sudden, you're holier than now because you know what I mean. You don't like the way this person is dressed, or like, oh my
No,
God, he fed a
he's got a
dog.
Fleetwood Mac shirt on.
Yeah, exactly. What the
That
heck?
was the biggest one. I was like, Fleetwood
That's
Mac's awesome.
insane, right?
It's like,
Like
shut up.
didn't Prabhupada get on stage with like the Grateful Dead and like Janis Joplin and stuff? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah.
come on,
Crazy.
people are out
And
of their
I
minds.
come from a like an arts and entertainment background, and I always ask this question towards the end. Are you a movie buff? And if so, like what are your top three favorite movies? I always have to ask this question.
I mean, yeah, I mean, of course, I obsess over movies. I mean, I'm a modern day American, so if I'm not staring at a screen, there's something wrong. You know what I mean?
You
I
mentioned
don't,
Clockwork Orange earlier.
yes, and I don't know. A lot of people get like kind of bent out of shape when you say something about that being your favorite movie because of certain violence in that movie and certain things happen. But to me, those things, those incidents in that movie, that's not what the movie is about, and that's not that's not the message that the whole idea of this guy, the question of is it okay for us to make someone
One Be Good.
a good person,
Yes.
or what I mean, is it better for them, or are we supposed to just let them have come to their own realization of that? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
to me, that's like one of the major questions, like in life. You know what I mean? It's
And everybody kind of misses the mark on that when the violence. And I mean, I will admit,
yeah,
like, it is pretty disturbing to watch some
sure,
of
of
that
course
stuff.
it
I
is.
saw
Of
it in high
course.
school, and even now watching, I'm still like, ooh,
Well,
this is
the,
heavy,
the
but
book is worse, you know what I mean? Because when you realize, like, the main character is supposed to be a kid, you know what I mean? Like, these are,
yeah,
like, these are preteens, these are kids, ooh,
yeah, yeah,
but it's because the focus is supposed to be the whole, that whole question, and of course, because I'm, like a history geek, the whole idea of it taking place in this kind of, you know, obviously there was something that happened between the USSR at the time and in England or the West in general, and that's why you get that that language, and I was like, wow, this is like a real fascinating kind of like take on like the future, or
yeah.
history. um so yeah, so that one, um uh this is kind of left field, but Repo Man.
I love Repo Man.
Repo Man is it's probably one of the greatest movies I've ever seen in my life, and it's
Yeah.
like it's I can't watch movies repeatedly, like not very often, not very many.
Okay.
That one, I don't care. You can put it on
Throw it
anytime.
on.
Anytime.
Yeah.
It's one of the greatest things on earth. You
We
know?
did a we did a Run Devil Run Repo Man shirt.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna need that.
And I always give the guests at the end of the show, I give them a T-shirt of their choice. So yeah, I'll hook you up with that. So
Nice.
Clockwork Orange, Repo Man. What else you got for me?
What else? What else? What else? Let me see. I mean, I could probably, I could probably, start on like Star Wars and stuff, but I feel like that's a whole other conversation. That's not necessarily a favorite movie. That's a favorite kind of
I remember you
idea.
posting something though about how the Gray Jedi, how the
The,
Jedi were kind of assholes or whatever, and like you're
oh,
like
I'm
the
totally
Jedi are the ones.
anti-Jedi. The Jedi are
Explain
the
that.
biggest.
Please explain it.
All right. So, okay, I'm just gonna say Planet of the Apes is probably my third. The one I'll see, like the original
Oh,
Planet of the Apes, is probably my third.
fantastic food.
When
Love it.
I'll
Okay.
enter there, and I have a personal reason for that too, which I'll get into in a second. But
All right.
the Jedi thing, you got Luke, okay? His first exposure is to Kenobi, Ben Kenobi, okay? Ben Kenobi straight up just lies to him, very first thing, because he's trying to get him involved in something that he's involved in. You know what I mean? So he just lies to him, tells him like, oh yeah, your dad wanted you to have this, and you did completely lies to him about the whole thing. Then and of course he catches him later when he says something about what I said was true, from a certain point of
A certain
view.
point of view. Right.
Okay, get out of here. You are a liar. The Jedi's just lie. You know what I mean? And so you start finding like throughout the movies, the Jedi's basically just say whatever they want and to kind of achieve their own goals and their own ends. You know what I mean? And when you're looking at the big picture, okay, the Empire, they were not morally the greatest. Like, they wanted to bring order to the galaxy by, killing anyone who is opposed to that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But in the bigger picture, this is the government, and the Jedi are basically willing to, by any means necessary, overthrow the government, regardless of who that harms. You know what I mean? Like they'll
Sounds
kill.
familiar.
Like, yeah. I mean, and Luke blew up the Death Star. Most of the people in that Death Star were just employees or like military personnel.
Sounds
You know
like
what I mean?
Clerks.
Yeah, he killed like thousands of people. You know what I mean? It's like,
Like
come on.
subcontractors and yeah.
Yeah, you get the janitor in there. He's just
Uh,
making his paycheck. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, yeah.
you got these guys who are in there on the, they just joined the military or whatever. You know what I mean? To get off their
Right.
crap planet or whatever. And so they're all killed too because screw those guys. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Because Luke is, and then you got Han Solo, who he's not a Jedi. Except this guy is a smuggler.
Mhm.
And the good guys have no problem with aligning themselves with like known
Criminals.
criminals because
Yeah,
these criminals will do what they need them to do.
exactly.
It's like, come on, man. So they're
Yeah.
not the good guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're just other guys. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
And
which
they manipulating the dice like in Phantom Menace,
yes,
wherever, Qui-Gon is like, Watto would have won that hand. Now,
uh huh.
granted, yeah, the kid and his mom were slaves, but it was like he would have won that hand, but like, Liam Neeson's like, nope.
Yeah,
Like use some magic.
and you save the kid, and it's like, oh, sorry about your mom, bro. She's got.
Sorry,
It's
your
like,
mom
what?
can't come.
You know
Sorry,
what I
kid.
mean? What the hell?
Yeah.
So
He could have done some sort of trickery to get her, but he didn't,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. But so they make they kind of make it over time and over all of the various episodes, if you will. It's kind of no different than like politics in America. You know what I mean? You've got the left and the right, and like, wait, which one's the good guys? What? You know what I mean? It's just you
Some
know
more questionable than the other.
yeah, sure. Uh, from a certain point of view.
Indeed.
Um, but but yeah, and just going back to what we were talking about a minute ago with the idea of like the listening to music that was, oh, you listen to music that's like, violent and all this. And so last night, actually, at the show that we played, I had a conversation with a devotee from the Houston ISKCON temple, and great guy, punk rock dude. And he's the cook there on Tuesdays and all. Good guy. He sneaks. Oh man, I shouldn't even. Should I say this? He sneaks the vegan sour cream in there when he's cooking, so he can make the grung potatoes. You know what I mean? So that because of course they don't. You got to use milk.
Prostate.
You know what I mean? Like so.
Yeah.
It's like,
Heretic.
my man. But I had a conversation with him last night because there was this. The shows around here are basically incident free. It's great. Like the scene here in Houston is pretty amazing. But there was this one kid who was just going around and like crowd killing, just like kicking people. He kick some girl, knocks her over, and it's like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? So immediately, like he jumps in to stop this kid. And he felt bad about it because he's like, I'm really, I'm anti-violence. I'm not violence. I'm not violent. I don't. I'm like, unfortunately, sometimes it takes certain responses. It takes a violent response to violence in order to establish nonviolence.
Yeah.
I'm like, we can go right back to day one, book one, and go to Bhagavad Gita, and talk about
Yeah.
that. But
You can look at even like Unforgiven, like the fact that all these violence was being enacted upon these prostitutes. Clint Eastwood had to go in and like essentially clean house to get rid of all these scumbags so that they
right,
wouldn't
yeah.
abuse these women anymore. Yeah.
And one of the things we talked about last night, because he had with him actually someone who has just started going to the temple, and he actually brought up the show too. It's and it's like, look, everything has its place. Like even things like anger, because I think you'd checked out or read an interview I did when I was in No Resistance, when they were asking about, it's like, well, if this is if this is your religion, how can you sing stuff about like anger and violence? I'm like, because each thing has its place.
For
Each
real.
thing is supposed to be, and the thing is, what we learn or what we try to kind of strive for is using everything in its proper way. And if we can use everything in Krishna's service, then it's we can kind of turn it around and use it in a way that's intended. Like so,
Right.
like I hate child molesters. I hate rapists. So it's okay to be angry about that. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's okay to be angry about things. It's what you do with that anger and how you use it. You know what I mean?
Channel
So
it.
if you're angry that some kid is over here kicking girls over and like punching people in the face, under the guise of dancing at a show, it's okay to go in there and stop it. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
okay to be angry about that. That's what
Yeah.
anger is for. It's
Mhm.
like the old PIL song, like you're right, anger is an energy. It's like it is. And if just like anything else, you use it in the right way. You know what I mean? It's
Of course.
the and so they wound up kicking this kid out, and the singer from one of the other bands, him along with Saba Dave, they kind of got the kid out of there, but it was funny because you see him like literally trying to talk to the kid. The kid's like, but this is hardcore. And in my mind, my 53-year-old mind, I'm like, oh my God, please don't let me go in there and start like barking at the old man. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
But it was great to see that, like I said, because this scene here in Houston, it's really kind of like the most right from when I first moved here, it's really like the most refreshing and like magical thing. Like like I was saying about like say oi bands and what constitutes an oi band here. We have some bands here that are so legit and so great, and it's like it makes me they make it so that I'm okay using those words. like Oi and Skinhead and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Because you don't want to use it in front of other people because other people have no idea and they think of it as this, this other thing. But we have bands here like there's bands like this band called Storm of Ages, right? These guys, it's like you could have pulled them off like the back of like one of the first Oi albums. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, not just the way they look, but I mean, like musically too. You know what I mean? It's like, you know what? The fact that bands like this can do it right makes it so much worse that there's all these other bands out there that that just look stupid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have like there's a bunch of hardcore bands too. We have bands like have you ever heard of the band Liberty and Justice?
No, I haven't. The only Texas hardcore bands I knew were like Bitter End and I mean, I know a lot of like the old like Austin punk rock bands and
Yeah,
stuff, but I'm
yeah.
not real familiar with a lot of the bands from Texas.
Yeah, it's really special, man. Like bands, like I said, like Liberty and Justice, and like Overtime, and Storm of Ages. There's another band called Hooligan 45. They've been around for a long time, and they're like legit. Like when you see them, it's like this is music. You know what I mean? This isn't just like they're not some cookie cutter like bullshit. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay, well they have the right boots on, so that means that that's the real deal. You know what I mean? Or another band, newer band like Without Apology. It makes it so that you're playing these shows and it's like, man, this is legit. You know what I mean? This is like it's not it's not just crap. So in the conversation that I was having with this devotee last night at the show, we started talking about like when Shelter first came around. All right, when Shelter first started. At first, I wasn't thrilled about it. Because I was like, I was a big like Youth Today guy and stuff. You know what I mean? That was, that's what It's like all of a sudden, like you hear Shelton, I'm like, well, why are you singing? You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And of course, later on, I grew to appreciate it and understand what's going on here. I was like, I like music. Wait a minute, but then you had 108. And like when 108 first popped up, listen, they played a show one time downstairs in the Brooklyn Temple.
Right.
It was the most insane thing. And for a little while, there was a time when we, a couple of us, traveled with them. We were all staying at Gita Nagari, Gita Nagari farm in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And they were doing a retreat there, and it was with like the Shelter and the 108 guys and stuff. And there was going to be a couple of shows that we were going to travel to, like with them. And that was the first time you ever see sannyasis stage diving, and it was so the greatest thing about that was not us seeing that, but seeing other like regular people just from like the hardcore scene, like what is this? There's these like monks, you know what I mean? But the thing I loved about 108 was that it wasn't necessarily anger, it's just like this just frantic outpouring of emotion that to anyone else sounds like anger. And,
sure.
And it's like, but the lyrics that you're hearing, you can cry over those lyrics. It's like unbelievable. Right. You know what I mean? It's the furthest thing from anger. You know what I mean? But
right.
So
I get angry listening to terrible music.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's bad or if it's without heart or anything, I'm just like,
it puts me to a rage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like
not real. This is not authentic.
Yeah.
I get it. Now back to Planet of the Apes.
Oh yeah, sure.
You mentioned Planet of the Apes being one of your favorites.
Planet of the Apes is one of my favorites because one, the obvious that. In the original, of course, and I love all of the later incarnations also. Like I'm just you put the Planet of the Apes stamp on it, I'm in. Like I don't,
Okay.
Even that weird like Marky Mark one where they kind of, it was like a completely different story, but I was still into it.
I've only seen like the original 5.
Okay, well
I've never seen the Marky Mark ones. Those. I didn't think that I would like them all actually, and because I'm like, there's got to be like diminishing returns, but like when I watched them all, I was like, wow, these are all really good in their own regard,
Yeah, those original 5, like I swear that you could base a religion on that, on just those movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and just the genius, of course, of the entire cycle of those who came to Earth wound up being, the ancestors of the ones who started the Planet of the Apes. That
Right,
the
right.
whole cycle is so amazing.
Yeah,
But and it's something you don't really, that kind of storytelling you don't really attribute to, movies from that long ago, like sci-fi
yeah,
movies from that long ago. I would say, you know
yeah,
what I mean.
yeah.
But also, in the first one, say, and even the second one, to an extent, the idea of, they're basically mocking, racism in America, and the whole, it's like they're trying to like just put it in your face, like, look, please pay attention. This is, you know what I mean?
Right.
And, so I'm so shocked that movie wasn't, the first one wasn't like banned right away because of that message. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
People just took
definitely.
it as like a movie about, monkeys. I shouldn't say that. They don't have tails. Um, they don't. So that's, you don't call them monkeys. Um,
Right.
so the idea that people just took it on the surface is why it didn't, get banned and stuff. But everyone else who was paying attention was like, huh,
Oh yeah. You
no,
you you know, you notice subtler
yeah,
uh
it's
elements
amazing.
and yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And for me personally, one of my biggest things is that, I grew up in Staten Island, and to me, I've always held that like Staten Island is the cradle of American pop culture civilization, which is that's probably, a podcast on its own. We should,
Yeah,
have a
definitely.
discussion on its own. But um, that applies to Planet of the Apes because when you see at the end when Charlton Heston's traveling on the horseback with Nova, right? And of course, he comes up on the Statue of Liberty on the left, right? It's like, okay, you go back and you find out he's traveling. Uh, I have this. I put together this whole like report and dissertation about it. But the amount of time he's traveling north,
Mm.
that means that where he is coming from was a place called Newdorp or Midland Beach in Staten Island. So that means that the Planet of the Apes, Ape City, was in Staten Island because of the way he traveled. And that's further backed up in the second movie because when they go after him, when the other guys come and they're trying to follow like the path that he went, they
Yeah.
keep going that same direction and they wind up in Manhattan, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And with the Statue of Liberty on the left, when you take the Staten Island ferry to Manhattan, which we had to do to go to school every day and stuff, that's the same path that he took with Nova on horseback.
Interesting.
So because it's many years later, of course, there's land, there's water,
It's
there's
actually
water.
in Southern California.
Well, yes, it was filmed in Southern California, but
The reason
just
I know that is because I shot part of a music video there for a band that I did, and I wanted to specifically go to that mountain where
that's
they
fantastic.
filmed the end of the movie, and I got the shot. I was so happy about
That's
that.
fantastic.
Yeah, yeah,
But
love those movies. They're great.
yeah, but so to me, I've always been like, it's always held like a place in my heart. It's like, oh my God, Ape City is Staten Island. And if you grew up there and you know about Staten Island, it makes sense that this will become freaking Ape City one day, you know.
It's fantastic. So, what do you got as far as upcoming shows? Let's promote you guys a little bit.
Actually, right now we just played our kind of last show in this like string of shows that we have because now we're just kind of locking ourselves up in the studio to work on the second album. So
Okay.
we we're gonna we'll probably wind up doing a show or two in March, locally. But our main plan right now is just we have all the other songs kind of ready to go. So we just kind of want to tighten them up and fine tune everything so we can get in and record the next set of songs. You know,
When's that supposed to be released?
it probably won't be till summer. You know,
Okay,
summer. Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, because we want
Well,
to
I'll
kind
be
of
sure
take
to
our
post
time.
all your links here down in the comments section.
Awesome, thank you.
I want to thank you for coming on the show. This has been a
Oh man,
fantastic conversation.
great. It's been great to have
And
you here.
anytime you want to come back, we'll make it happen again. We can do the 2 hour long Staten Island conversation.
Awesome. That'd
Talk
be
about
great.
how it's the pinnacle of the world's culture. I think that'll be awesome. Um,
I'm
So,
telling you, man. I'm telling you. You go back. Punk rock. You got David Johansen from the New York Dolls from Staten Island. You want to go back to anything you want to go to, and all roads lead to Staten Island. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
You
I
go
don't
back to.
doubt it. I mean,
You were talking
yeah,
about Morrissey before. All right.
influenced by New York Dolls.
Well, not just influenced by New York Dolls. Morrissey, he wrote 2 books when he was young, and even later in his autobiography, he kind of revisits this. Well, when he was young, he would go to stay with his aunt in America,
Mm,
um, and it just happened to be Staten Island. And
I
he
knew
would
that. Yeah,
and he would always write about the New York Dolls and how he wished he was from there because this is where the New York Dolls sprouted from. But
yeah,
that's amazing. You know what I
that
mean?
is
So
crazy. That's
it
wild.
just
Well,
because it's not my argument.
I'm gonna post your links here in the comments, and everybody who joined the stream, I want to thank you all so much. We'll be sure to post this on all the social media outlets, so anybody who didn't catch the live show can see it again. And once again, I want to promote Hell's Heart Merch Co. You can see the URL down there in the banner, hellsheartco.bigcartel.com. Use the code 20 for 20% off your entire order. And I think you should do that because these are high quality Bella Canvas tri blend t shirts and hoodies, and you'll
Cool
love them. If you,
designs.
what's that?
Awesome, cool designs.
Yeah,
I
if
love
you like movies, if you like hardcore, you like all that stuff, check it out. You might enjoy it, and I'd appreciate it. So, um, but everybody, thank you again. And Sundarananda Das, I want to thank you, sir, so much. And everybody, hang out backstage for a few minutes, and we'll chop it up. And everybody, thank you for joining the stream. Namaste, job bless, and be good. Hare Krishna.
you, Prabhuji.